Consider Commando Radio Show and AUN TV with my lovely wife Christina, and we are wrapping up the Florida Election Integrity Summit here in Orlando, and in October 2022. It's been incredible, Christina.
Yeah, it has.
And it's our privilege to talk with Kris Jurski.
Yeah.
And Kris, you're a cyber warrior.
Yeah, you want to call it that?
And you've been given kind of the keys to the election data through the Republican Assembly team. And
yeah, absolutely. I can't stress enough how important Florida Republican Assembly
I'll
is.
let you talk about your findings, however much you wanted to tell our audience, because it's significant.
Yeah, it is.
This whole event has been amazing. We've had so many excellent presenters and interviews, and it's great to have you to kind of wrap this up. But if you'd want to tell our audience what got you into the cyber sleuthing, if you will, on election integrity and the data.
Yeah, definitely. I first met you back in June at one of the other conferences as well in Orlando. And at that point, I was under my own banner of the People's Audit, where I built my own website working with Lake County, the coalition of Lake County primarily, but we started reaching out, trying to get data across the state. We at that moment we started putting a laser focus on mail-in ballots because we were doing a lot of analysis around the election, and there's so many brilliant people out there. We didn't think that enough people were focusing in on specifically the chain of events of mail-in ballots. We saw the mules, but the mules is after it's already there. So I use the World War II analogy of when they had to go against the tanks in Germany in World War II. Our tanks were weaker. We targeted their fuel depots. We took out their fuel depots. The tanks ran out of gas, and then basically they were basically paperweights. So we thought the same thing. Let's go after the supply of ballots and try to figure out where are these ballots coming from. It led to some amazing discoveries really fast. Drinking out of a fire hose through the month of June, learned a lot. But if you wanted to summarize it, it's essentially there's a completely hidden system for vote by mail ballot requests. This is not public information. The parties and political committees are allowed to have access to this information, and it's specifically the people asking for a mail-in ballot.
My gosh, that is fascinating. It's not public.
Yeah. So the reason it's very, very important to focus on that is because when you're looking at the voter rolls, you see a residential address and you see a mailing address. You don't necessarily know where they're asking for their mail-in ballot to go, because this is a secondary system. This is a system that basically they make a request and they ask for their mail-in ballot to be delivered to this particular address. So very, very important that we found that out.
So it's a system within the system.
Yeah, exactly. And no one really knew it. But when we started working with candidates, if you remember back before, we were talking about candidates getting huge amounts of undeliverable mail. We were like, well, where are you getting this address information to put on these envelopes? And they showed us these reports called, there's specifically a report called VR Systems Ballot Request System. That's essentially, in Florida, we use VR systems. And that is very precise because they're specifically saying the date that they've asked for the ballot to be mailed, or the request itself, when it actually delivers to their house, and more importantly, what address did they ask to be delivered to. So that was startling, because when we started seeing that, we were like, wait a minute. We backtracked through that report, and we noticed that in Congressional Districts 11 specifically, we were doing an analysis. 7,000 people had different addresses based on where they requested the ballot to go versus the official finished report.
Well, that's quite a few in a
federal
it's just congressional race.
7,000. Yeah, in a primary.
Okay.
So we started diving into that number and trying to figure out what's going on there, and we were looking at the addresses specifically. And the first thing we did was we ran it. This is a common thing that you do in e-commerce, is you check with the post office if you've used eBay or Amazon. They've probably asked you to correct your address because you might mistyped it or you used the wrong abbreviation. That's essentially a free service is provided from the post office. So we checked all of these addresses with the post office,
Right.
and about 500 of these addresses came back as not found. Very, very different, because undeliverable means that the post office has tried to deliver to that address,
Sure.
and they know that that address is bad, so they're telling you that that address is bad. Address not found coming back from the post office made us sit back, because we're like,
Yeah.
they already sent a voter information card out.
Yeah.
This is all within June.
Yeah.
They already sent a voter information card out and a sample ballot
Yeah.
and a mail-in ballot now, and they're still saying that the address is not found. It didn't make any sense.
Wow.
So we dived into that pile of addresses, and I still haven't had a chance to analyze every single one of them.
Sure.
But one address jumped out at me because I was local to Claremont,
Sure.
and it was Red Belly Road. And we were just looking at that address going, I've lived in Claremont for 12 years, never heard of that road, don't know what it is.
Goodness.
Checked it on Zillow, doesn't exist. Checked it in the tax records, doesn't exist. Checked it in Google, doesn't exist.
So it's a fictitious address. Is that the residential or the mail?
That was specifically where they asked the ballot to go to.
Oh.
And it's an excellent question, because again, now we're sitting there saying, okay, we have this address that they're asking for their mail-in ballot to go to that's purely fictitious. Is this like a made-up person? Like, we had to dive into this a little bit deeper. So what we did after that was we looked up the current voter records and tried to analyze, like, okay, where's this address from? Is it a mail address, whatever, exactly what you're asking. And lo and behold, there's 37 people that live on this fictitious street, Red Belly Road. And we're like, okay, this is just getting weird, because did they make up all these voters? And that's where this was like step by step, just analyzing his data, trying to go down this rabbit hole. And now we see 37 people clearly have this same address. We grabbed all their voter
Sounds like a big
IDs.
house to me.
Yeah, and no, they were in different locations on Red Belly Road, but it was spread out across the entire street.
Okay.
That's something.
Yeah, so we took those voter IDs. We had the 2020 data on hand, and we just dropped it in the 2020 database. And here we are now. All these houses, they're real voters, but they were on 12th Street in Claremont. So now we had a situation like, okay, and we've seen this before. Unfortunately, we saw it in the 2020 election, but we didn't know how to explain it, where we had all these people switching addresses 2 months before the election. So we knew that, like, we're looking at this and like, here we are, this is it. That we had 12th Street is what their real address was, and now they're asking for ballots to be delivered to Red Belly Road.
Which may not even be an actual street.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
So if you mail that to Red Belly, what's the post office going to do? There is no Red Belly.
Magic question. That's the magic question. Is like, what's going on?
But it is
here?
a ballot.
It's a real ballot, and this is what's getting scary, because when we were looking at this is coming right to the end of the primary. Literally, we finally made a bit of these discoveries the day of the primary and the day after the primary closed. And what we found out was the data came out for the next month for the voter rolls. Here they are now, they're all switched back to 12th Street. In the official report, they're all switched back to 12th Street.
After the primary.
After the primary. So, like, basically, on the official report.
Oh, wow.
Now, so to put this all together.
The plot is getting thicker.
Yeah, they're switching an address to a fictitious address.
Right.
5 mail-in ballots were requested to those people on that street.
That doesn't exist.
That don't exist. And then after those ballots were delivered to that fictitious address, they switched back to the real address.
Boy.
Wow. But now, if there's a fictitious address, but there's a very, very real ballot, then somebody is got a chain of custody of that ballot.
Yeah.
Somebody, maybe it's the post office. Who knows?
That's the magic
Somebody has gotten that ballot.
Yeah.
Now the question is, did that ballot actually end up showing an actual vote? Registered
in
vote.
that particular case, what we found, nobody voted on that street. But we have a weird suspicion that because we discovered that right on election day, and if somebody had the ability to manipulate what we saw being manipulated, it's not hard to believe that someone went in and said, cover those tracks.
Yeah.
Because we literally saw this change within the course of a 2-3 week period. They were changing the vote records behind the scenes. and they were manipulating addresses behind the scenes. This is where it all came together.
In that 11th district, how many addresses might have been changed in your estimation?
On a conservative analysis, we had 7,000 that we could clearly identify that there were a different address at the beginning when they asked for their ballot versus what was on the official report. Now there might be some excuses in there because when we challenged supervisor of elections, they say, oh, people call in all the time and want their address changed. And I said, well, when do they ask for a ballot to go to somewhere that's a fictitious address? Sure. So we went out and canvassed those people right after the weekend after the election. We canvassed everybody on that street. And first of all, nobody knew what the road was. No one understood what we were asking about. They said the people that were requesting the ballot never asked for a ballot. That's the most important thing. They never requested the ballot.
They never requested the ballot.
And they never asked for their address to be changed.
So things are being manipulated by computer.
Yeah,
to the tune of about 7,000 in a congressional district.
Tiny little congressional district, as well as that was a primary. So you can imagine what happens for the general. So that's the thing. So then the thing that was just an absolute miracle of being at the right place at the right time is when we were last person on the street. They're like, yeah, we did get our voter ID card. And we were like, well, can you go please get your voter ID card? We'd like to see it. And they pulled it out. They didn't even realize it because they didn't read it. They just clipped it and put it in their wallet. When they pulled it out, lo and behold, it's printed as Red Belly Road. So this caught them in the crime. Like, and if you think about what was happening at that particular time frame, the entire state of Florida was getting all of their voter information cards mailed out. So it cemented the fraud. The moment that they were changing all these addresses was at the exact same time that these voter identification cards were going out.
So if you don't live at Red Belly Road, but you receive a voter ID card that says Red Belly Road, because you're right, there's two addresses. There's the ballot address, and then there's the voter ID address.
We're sitting there talking to the lady that has the card. She's in shock because she doesn't realize that it had that on there. And here comes the mailman that walks up at this exact same moment, and they're like, it was the strangest thing. During this 2-3 month period, we saw nothing but election mail coming. All political mail was going to this area for Red Belly Road. But because I know these people and I know them on a first name basis, I delivered their mail because I knew who they were. But that's the only person on that entire street that got their voter identification card. Everybody else, it all bounced back to the supervisor of elections. So the supervisor of elections, that's another story.
There's a huge red flag if you start getting a bunch of bounce backs.
Yeah, the supervisor of election did a video around the same time frame that we were getting really worried about this happening again, this vote switching stuff. And he's standing in front of a baker's rack full of these undeliverable voter information cards. And you might remember back in, I think it was June or July, they were doing actually press releases around the state saying, hey, can you make sure that your address is up to date? And we were like, why on earth would people have to update their address with the post office if everything's tied together with the DMV? As soon as you get your address changed with the DMV, it automatically notifies the supervisor of elections. And he's standing in front of a baker's rack with 22,000 or I think 18,000 we thought at the time, all these undeliverable information cards. And we just were like, you got to be kidding me! It's happening again. They're flipping addresses. And there's a combination in there. In that 22,000, there's a small, we call it an onion because the more layers you peel that back, the more you want to cry. That one layer of the onion was essentially completely fraudulent fake addresses that never existed.
Right.
Another layer of that was they would change the address just so slightly that you wouldn't even realize it because you would be looking at it on a paper and it would say apartment 18. And you would be like, that looks like a real address, but if you checked with the post office, it's undeliverable. And then right before the election, it's changed to 7-18. That's the real address.
Well, the fact you'd have that many change of addresses is terribly suspicious.
Yeah. And then what they would say is, oh, that was a clerical error, or that was a clerical error, but it's a very convenient clerical error to correct after the ballot was supposedly delivered to the broken address. And then when I challenged the supervisor election on that, they said, get this is unbelievable. They're allowed by statute to mail 3 ballots out to every voter. So if you mess up your address, They can send 3 ballots. Just like if you go to the polling booth and you spoil, they call it spoil, like you actually make a mistake at the polling booth. They're using the same logic for mail-in ballots.
So every Florida voter can get up to 3.
Yeah, you can call and say, I never got my ballot.
We've been talking in this conference about chain of custody being so important. Yeah, you got potentially 3 ballots supposed to go to you. That is ballot flooding.
Yeah.
In the worst degree.
So like every time we challenge the supervisor
they're
election,
all ballots that could be run through the machines and vote in one way or another.
Because once they have the ballot, all they have to do is go to the publicly accessible rolls.
Wow.
And you just grab a voter and fill it out and then forge a signature. That's probably the most. But what we also found here recently this morning, putting stuff together with different coalitions across the country, was I think Cleta Mitchell's group, Wendy Nissan, was in there in Orange County looking at signatures. Yeah. And here she is, she's looking at the signature and she says, can I have some more signatures for more of examples because this doesn't look right. They pull up the records and it's kind of like a card deck of all the signatures they have on file. And the first one she's looking at from 2019 is 100% identical match to what she's looking at on the ballot. And she's like, Kris, what's the chances that you're signing something, the same thing from 2019, now here in 2022 on a ballot? It's impossible for you to think that somebody could sign exactly the same way. So I'm like, you need to get a magnifying glass. We need to go look at this ballot and scrutinize it because we need to see, because there's no way that is an actual pen signature. She got the magnifying glass. She went in. She looks at it.
Look through the pixels.
It's printed. It's a printed signature.
Oh my!
So they're these same ballots that are basically
computer generating different addresses. Yeah. Computer generating even addresses.
Yeah, and this is basically when you show up at the
signatures.
polls.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So when you show up to the polls and they tell you that you've already voted, rarely did you ever see that it's an in-person vote that's canceling your vote out. It's typically someone delivered a mail-in ballot in your name. And now they're saying that you've already voted. And this is it. This is essentially how they're doing it.
You got 60-some counties here in Florida. How are the supervisor of elections responding to your information that you've unearthed?
They circled the wagons. The Lake County Supervisor of Elections, where we found Red Belly Road, Alan Hayes, he came out and he said, I used the 911 data. That was me. And nothing makes sense there because, first of all, why do you change people's addresses when you do redistricting? All you're doing is you're changing their precinct and their district. You're not changing their address.
No, not a physical address.
He made the excuse that, this is 911 and this house is facing a different direction. It's on a different road. The reporter, this got written in Epoch Times, the reporter just picked up the phone and called 911 in Lake County, and they're like, we've never heard of Red Belly Road. Red Belly Road doesn't exist.
You're not something.
So the excuse of what he's using, it just doesn't make any sense. But then more importantly is that they're circling the wagons. They essentially don't want anybody to see this and question these addresses. Because you have to understand, when you look at the official finished results after the election's over, you will never know that ballot was stolen unless you went and knocked on their door. Because the address is there of the real person, and you look on the tax records.
But in that 3-month window, it changed and then went back to its original. That is huge. That's huge, Kris. Yeah. You're onto something. This whole conference is onto a lot.
It's a great thing because, like, for example, I can't take 100% credit because this is like a combination of Lindell's team giving us stuff, people, grassroots people like Cleta Mitchell's group going out and checking signatures, and the biggest thing, FRA. Before the last event, I was just basically talking about Red Belly Road. Here comes Lou, he grabs me, takes me under a kin, and because FRA's reach and the ability of the clout of your organization, we were able to get the 4.4 million records for the general. So we were able to do this same analysis for the general election. However, they quickly kicked us out of that system when they probably recognized my name because my name was on the application. And it's kind of funny because my application came back and the first thing was it said, you were denied, you were accepted. And I thought it was a glitch because they were exactly at the same moment. So I logged into the system I was like, okay, I have access. There's got to be something wrong. So I downloaded the report. By the grace of God, we have that 4.4 million ballot requests. So it's in cement that I have those records when I do, because now we'll watch to see if they change something again for the general. And we did an analysis on that. FRA has been absolutely wonderful, because the clout, the reach of the different counties, plus Lou's given us access to lawyers and things like that.
Sure.
We're able to then send out messages copying the governor. The first thing is like right before the storm, I was kind of nervous, because I'm like, here comes this storm, and they're going to send all these mail-in ballots to Fort Myers and all these places that literally there's not even a mailbox there. So I think Cord Bird did something for some of those places, because we heard Broward County sent out the week after. They delayed mailing, but I really don't know. But we found 93,000 undeliverable mail-in ballots just on the first analysis of the general. There was, I mean, it gets really deep, because
well, you got some statewide races. You've got governor, senate. That's huge.
Major,
That's huge.
Yeah, and then some of the things, like statistic-wise, there was a 2-to-1 advantage. There was actually close to 2 million ballots. If you put Democrats and NPAs together, there's a 2-to-1 advantage Democrat for mail-in ballot. So we're really up against a juggernaut here. We got to turn out on election day, because this is the only way we're going to win this, because they're going to forecast. This is a midterm, but I can tell you right now, the daunting thing when you look at the numbers is they've literally flooded this with on par with what was in COVID for Trump's election by numbers. So that's what we're going up against. So you have to think, like, are we going to turn out the numbers that we did for Trump for a midterm?
Right.
That's what I'm thinking, that like we got an uphill climb to try and beat these people in the next election organically.
Well, we'll continue this story.
Definitely.
Because
huge.
Our country is on the chopping block. Through the ballots, through the electoral system that we have right now. And we thank you for coming on Circuit Man Radio Show. We are coming against a hard break. But Kris, the work will continue. So stay tuned. Here in Florida, some amazing data discoveries with the election voter records and their registration records. And how the mail-in ballot system is working. So thank you, Kris, for coming on the Circuit Man Radio Show.
Thank you. And get the word out
and sharing with everybody here at the Election Integrity Summit. So God bless you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We all
Appreciate it.
need
Thanks so
to
much.
be staying informed and vote.
Yes.